Today, we're going to be going over group tags, how that interfaces with AutoPilot, dynamic groups. We're also going to test enrolling a couple of devices. We're going to simulate, Jan's going to simulate a principal enrolling a device, and Veronica is going to simulate I got that backwards. Veronica is going to simulate a principal signing in, and Jan is going to simulate a teacher. And I'm going to show you kind of the differences of once we bring the platform online and once we use our group tags the right way to scale with device purchases, how we can kind of granularly control what people see in the Intune console within company portal, as well as being able to stipulate different policies in the different areas. And so I've got my Intune portal pulled up right here, and I wanted to showcase kind of these different areas and how this works. And so over here, we have our AutoPilot, the AutoPilot enrollment system, and we've got some virtual machines imported in here. So Jan and Veronica have Hyper-V booted up, and they have some virtual machines loaded that we've already imported the hardware hash into the tenant. And I wanted to point out that virtual machines, when you import them, will oftentimes have this very long serial number. And so that's kind of one of the ways you can always identify that it's a virtual machine and not a real one. But the other piece to this too that's really important to understand, self-deploy mode does not work on virtual machines. Self-deploy mode needs to talk directly to the TPM chip to be able to do its processes. And since these are in a hypervisor, they're simulated. And the problem is when it's simulated, I know there's a toggle box that says that you can emulate a TPM chip. But the problem is that with self-deploy mode, there's certain things that it has to lock down on the device, and it gets too confused when it sees more or less two devices assigned to one security chip. And so I just wanted to make sure we all understood, and before we got started, if any of our customers or other DSRs or DSS people are kind of training themselves and going through this, and they're not sure why self-deploy mode isn't working, that is the reason why. But we are going to be using our user enrollment methods today to enroll these devices, and we're going to kind of showcase, the easeability of how that is for our users as well as students. So now that we've got AutoPilot pulled up, we can see here that if we click over the serial number, on the right-hand side, we have this value called group tag. And right now, I've got it filled in with principals. And what this means is that when we place a large order with a partner, I can say, I want 500 Surface Laptop 5s. They're all going to principals. Okay? It sounds like a large institution, but that's what we're specifying. So we want principals. Well, what will happen is we're going to go over into the Intune console and we're going to create our dynamic group memberships. And I'm going to show you the Intune for Education console because remember, that can actually show us our group hierarchies. And so what's really kind of important to understand as you're kind of scaling this out in your institutions and kind of thinking about, man, how am I going to plan the groups, the AutoPilot profiles, and what is that all going to look like? Well, right now, I've got this broken up with faculty devices. And underneath that, I've got principal devices. And I know it might seem a little bit silly, but underneath that even, I've got what's called the principal's devices enrollment group. And the way that I recommend doing this, and the typical way that a lot of my schools do, is we'll create this initial group and we'll apply our AutoPilot profile. And then this group has a specific syntax that goes and dynamically looks in AutoPilot and says, hey, if there are any devices in AutoPilot that say that they have principals in the group tag, add them to this group and then apply this AutoPilot profile automatically. And so I want to show you what that looks like in the main Intune portal because the Intune for Education portal doesn't exactly give us like the right click menu, doesn't exactly give us a whole lot of options to see what's configured, whereas the main Intune portal does. And so what I want to do is I want to look for, if I could spell today. And I want to go and I want to look at this enrollment group. And as you can see on the right-hand side, it says membership type dynamic. And what's really important to understand is Azure AD has the ability to constantly pull and go and look in the various systems that you specify and say, hey, this value is on the account or the device, and please add it to that group automatically based on that information. We use this a lot when we're licensing user accounts. A lot of my customers will use that based on user account attribute data. Say their job title is on their account, and they'll have a group that's created based on that job title, and then they might assign software or licensing based on that group. And so I oftentimes recommend for our educational customers to kind of think about that, like long term, like what are all of my different groupings and job titles and stuff that I'm going to work with? Because the more that you can kind of plan that out and structure it, the easier it's going to be long term for your deployment, especially when you need to scale and scale quickly. Right now, to actually showcase really quick, so say if you've created the group already and it starts off assigned, you can click this toggle to change it to dynamic device. It'll then show a little area underneath here that says add dynamic query with a blue hyperlink. You'll click that, and then that will take you into this menu that we're in here now. Now, I always edit this and copy and paste the syntax in, but in the guide that I'll be including, there will be a link to a TechNet article where you can copy and paste these values if you need to. But to kind of explain, so device physical IDs equals, okay, and I know it says order ID, but ignore that, it's actually the group tag, and we're looking for principals. Now, say, for example, I'm creating this dynamic query, and I want to make sure that the devices are being seen. Well, I can come in here and type their serial numbers manually, or as luck would have it, it's popped up these three at the top, so I can click these. These are the virtual machines that they've enrolled. And we can see that we've got a green check mark, which means that the attributes are correct and it should be added to that group whenever Azure does its polling, which is usually about every 45 minutes. And so as we go in here, we can see, all right, order ID equals principals. So that attribute is correct, and we're going to add these devices to this group automatically. And if we go to members, we can see that right here. So that's a great way to scale. And then long term, once you have these systems in place, you just place an order and go, hey, I am ordering more principal devices. I want 500 Surface Laptop 5s, like I was saying earlier. Group tag of principals, it automatically imports, and then all the devices will flow into this principals devices enrollment group. And then we would have policies applied to principals devices, which would flow down to that one and that one only. But if we really wanted to get even more granular, say, want to specify it by building or site or whatever else, you can create subgroups underneath the principal devices one, while it's alongside this one. And then as the devices are enrolled, go back into this group, we've got what's called the bulk operations. And we can import and export, we can download the members that are dynamically in that group. And then from there, we can granularize and say, hey, I want this set of devices in this group and this set of devices in this group. And then you can hit the import button after you've separated the file and then import the devices in that way. So it makes it really easy to kind of translate and move devices between different sites or buildings if you do really want to get that granular. The other part to this too is, so like I was talking about earlier, remember, as we have different groups and the granularity down, say, for example, I wanted to make an application available to a particular user, but not another. Well, in this scenario, I would make something available for principals devices or the user group of principals, and they would be able to see it, but the teachers groups would not. And where this is very beneficial is when you're first bringing on the company portal. I know you're probably going to try and get a lot of apps in there as quickly as possible, just to make sure like you're pulling in all the old applications so teachers have what they have access to in the past. Well, the problem is when you bring that all online, like say for example the business office needs to use company portal and they need to install, like some sort of specific Adobe software or something that they need in the business office. Well, if you just more or less make every app available to all users, which is not best practice, the problem is that everybody's going to see everything in terms of apps. But what you can do is, and what's really nice about this system and this hierarchy, once you've got it created, is you can specify and say, hey, make this available to principals devices in the principals group, and only they're going to see it in company portal. Same for teachers. And what's really awesome about that is the portals won't show the different software between the different groups. So the teacher's company portal might have 120 pieces of software in it, but the finance director, for example, or the principal only has 5 or 10. And so it really gives you that ability to kind of remove like the extra kind of stuff that users aren't going to care about to make it a little bit easier for the adoption. So now that we've got this group tag set and it's been imported into that group, and that group is assigned this AutoPilot profile, the devices are now ready to start through their enrollment processes. Now, the one other thing I want to always preface this with that's very, very important. When you're deploying devices and you're enrolling them for the first time, remember how I've talked about previously, how if you've got a combination of MSI and Win32 apps, you need to repackage them all as Win32s, even if they're MSIs. And I also want to preface and reiterate this again. It's very important to do that, because if you don't, and I know some of our educational customers have line of business apps that are still in the system and they've forgotten about them, the problem is you will get enrollment failures. And the reason being is the MSIX engine and the Intune management agent are two separate services on the device. And the problem is if the Intune management agent passes off the installer file to the MSIX engine, and then it moves to install its next Win32 app, you'll run into a bit of an issue where if that MSI makes a change to a same system file with the Win32 app that's being deployed at the same time, you'll cause a system crash because Windows doesn't know how to deal with that scenario where two different installing platforms are trying to make changes to the system at the same time. And so it's really, really important that when you're going through this like these phases and you're testing things out, please just go ahead and save the time and effort and repackage the line of business apps. I know they're super easy to import. I know it's easy to drag, like to just click the little update or not update, but the replace and then put in the new one. But you're truly going to cause yourself issues long term. Now, the last thing I also want to preface this with, because we did create, I believe, our enrollment status page in the previous video, but just in case we did not, as we go through this process, make sure that you are creating a default enrollment status page that you are at least applying to all of your user accounts or at least all of your devices. And the reason being that this is important. If you leave the default one in the system, this won't be turned on. And say you run into an enrollment failure and there's some sort of problem that occurs, the device you won't be able to hit the reset this device button. And the downside to that is the device will be in a defunct state, and your only option at that point will be to recover the device with a recovery image. That's not ideally where we want to be, especially when we're testing and bringing things online for the first time. So please, please, please take the time really quick to go in, create the enrollment status page. It's super simple. You just go into this bubble that I was in, click create new on the top left-hand corner, click a couple of toggles, and then here are the values that I recommend that you use to start off with. Now, when you go to production, say you're going to move this and you're going to do this for a bunch of student devices. The one setting I want to make sure that you take into consideration is the allow users to use device if installation error occurs. And why this is very important, if this is set to yes, and say this parameter is in there and you have a proxy filter that needs to be on the device before the student can get to the desktop, if for any reason that proxy filter fails to install right, they can get to the desktop and they would be unfiltered. And so I always recommend test all of your applications. Make sure the AutoPilot enrollment processes work well. And as long as that works well, then you can revert the value. But the problem is I still highly recommend keeping or setting this to no afterwards, because that way, in case it doesn't get installed properly, the student can't get to the desktop and be unfiltered. Now, I know the only alternative at that point is the student has to hit the reset this device and they have to wait another 30 minutes for it to set itself up again. But as a tech director / sysadmin before, I really would prefer if they had to hit that reset button and have to wait 30 minutes than to me get a call from a teacher that so-and-so has been able to get to porn or other websites that they shouldn't be. But obviously that's up to every educational institution and how controlling they want to be with some of these settings. But I just want to make sure that we understand that that's very important. And then the last piece with this is the error message. So when something happens, this is what's shown. I highly recommend changing the default one in there and putting in whatever values you have for like your help desk system, or maybe it's you have a dedicated team that answers phones. Please make sure you put that in there, because when you go to scale this, and my largest recommendation, if you're going to scale 5,000 or 10,000 devices, I'd recommend having this spelled out. So that way, the few devices that you have that occasionally have issues, they have an easy way to contact you. And then that way, just in case the reset this device doesn't work, which usually it does, you can at least contact them and walk them through a couple of other procedures to get the device functional. So I just really, really recommend filling that in, because in case an error does occur, at least your users will be able to contact someone in case something happens. Especially if it's the first device that they're going to have, and that's literally the only way they have access to email. This is a good way to give them another way to contact to the IT department internally to kind of work through some of these. So now that I've kind of gone over all these different environments and why this is important, the hierarchies, apps, and kind of granularizing the different groups and making sure that it's pushed out in different areas so that others can't see it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and have Jan share her screen, and then she's going to go ahead and Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're Deborah today, right?
I sure am.
So Jan is going to log in as Deborah and show us the sign-in process, and we're going to work our way up from there. And I'll talk about what's kind of going on as Jan goes through this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then Jan, please go ahead and share yours. Oh, and by the way, we are doing this with Windows 11, but the processes that we're working through right now still work on Windows 10 today. I just highly recommend Windows 10 2004 or newer at a minimum, just to kind of make sure you're not going to deal with any additional AutoPilot issues. Back before then, we had some TPM attestation issues in case you run into that, and we've since patched a lot of that with updates. But all right, Jan, well, why don't we go through this enrollment process? So Jan has the user enrollment process, and the first thing it's going to ask, well, what's the right region or country? Well, Jan's in the United States. And the reason that we do it this way is because what if you have like a remote student that is over in another country and you still have to teach them, but you're based in the United States? We have a lot of schools here that have to deal with that scenario. And so we always like to give our students as well as staff the ability to choose the native country. So Jan, let's go ahead and click yes, we're a part of the United States. And the first thing that it's going to do now that it's checked the United States is it's going to use that and go, all right, well, what type of keyboard do you want? Well, we also know that there's a lot of different keyboard layouts for different countries. And we know that those keyboard layouts have different buttons. And so it's important that we offer this because those different buttons make a huge difference, especially if these other users have learned to type very quickly with another keyboard layout. And so this just gives them that ability to continue to use that layout that they've done previously. Since we're in the United States, once again, we're going to do the US and hit yes. And now it's going to ask if you want to add a second keyboard layout. This is, for example, the first one, your native is English, but then maybe your second one, the native might be Chinese or Spanish or whatever else it might be. This is where you can add that in so you can easily and quickly toggle between the two. Let's go ahead and skip. We don't need another one. I'm not the most fluent as much as I'd like to be with different languages. So now the system is going through and it's checking for updates. And this is very important because just in case we have a patch that we can quickly implement really quick, that we found that AutoPilot might have an issue with, or just little small things right now the machine is checking in on and saying, hey, for AutoPilot to go through its processes, I need to make sure that this is updated. So it came back. It shows that the updates seem to be updated enough for it to continue its processes. And now we're going to go through the sign-in procedure. Now, the one thing I want to really importantly point out, Jan's going to sign in with the full email address and password. But if you look on the sign-in options below, so Jan, if you can click on sign-in options really quick, please. What's really nice is if you have a security key, like if you have A5, you've done the FIDO security key stuff, here's where you can specify that so you can go through the normal enrollment steps. Now, the other part I wanted to bring up really quick too, for those of you that are still trying to do hybrid join processes, this is where it was moved to do the domain join instead process. Now, I don't recommend trying to go through this if you're trying to get Intune AutoPilot and Azure AD fully online, but I just wanted to showcase this piece really quick in case customers were confused as to where it went. So Jan, go ahead and hit the back button on the bottom right-hand corner, please. And then go ahead and sign in with the full email address and password. Yeah, and what Jan is doing is she's typing in the demo tenant domain right now. And so it's going to look like a bunch of numbers in onmicrosoft.com. But in your environment, it would have your default domain here. And that's what you would sign in with, or otherwise known as your user principal name, your UPN. Yep. And now we'll sign in with that password. Perfect. So now, right now, what it's doing is the system is checking in and saying, okay, well, I recognize this user. They're in Azure AD. I recognize that they have this AutoPilot profile assigned to this device. I recognize that they have these apps assigned to them as well as these policies. So it's checking in, it's collating all that data together, and it's pulling it together in the system for you. Now it's asking you about some privacy settings because Microsoft is really big on giving customers the option to choose. So this is talking about the Find My Device feature. Now, we do give the users the ability to turn this off. On the education side in the future, I'll be showing you a policy to turn this back on if you need to for student accounts. But it is important that we at least give users the option to turn this stuff off for privacy concerns, because I know like location tracking, and it's concerning for a lot of us. So in case they do want to turn that off and they don't want Microsoft to be able to see that, they can. And then later I will show you how to push out a policy where you can at least use it to just do the Find My Device feature. Let's go ahead and hit next. All right, and here it's going to be asking you some additional options. Now, the reason why it's asking Jan this is because it's detecting that this device is on a Surface. The Surface has inking and typing options. If this was a normal device that did not have this, that she would not have that particular option available. Now let's go ahead and accept the defaults, because remember, on the education side, we have policies that will push down that will change this to disable some of that because we're an educational institution. So it's just easier for our users just to click accept if it's easier for them. And just trying to understand, like, we will have policies they're going to push down that will lock some of this down, especially like the advertising ID and such. Now it's gone through that process, getting her desktop ready for her. It's recognized it. And we've seen this screen before, and it might take a few minutes to set up your PC. Right now, what it's doing is it's going through the process to set up her profile locally on the device. And it takes a few minutes depending. Now, the profile creation process depends on how fast the device is from not only a CPU processing power perspective, but the solid state drive or the hard drive perspective. So it's very important to understand. Lower powered devices that have eMMC drives, for example, will take a lot longer to sign in. And the reason being is that CPU has to take those extra cycles to go through and create that profile. And as it's doing it, it's trying to talk to that eMMC drive. Well, that eMMC drive probably tops out at 50, 100 megabits per second, depending on how old it is. And so kind of think of that like in the grand scale of things on new modern SSDs and NVMe drives, they're at like 1500 megabytes per second, read and write. Right there, like it already dwarfs it in terms of performance. And so we have to be cognizant of that as we're going through this process. The other part to be cognizant of this too is when the device itself is setting itself up, it only has to write to its internal drive, and so that process is going to be quicker. Whereas Jan and Veronica, for example, as they're going through this with their virtual machines, it's not only that hard drive is not only having to run their main operating system, it's also having to run this one. So you will notice in your virtual machine testing that it is going to be a little bit slower, because at least when you're using Hyper-V like this, understand you're sharing resources. Now, I know some of my customers might choose to load something up on VMware and on a server and do it that way. And that obviously would be exempt from that issue as long as the server dedicated the resources to that virtual machine. So I just wanted to help explain, like, the processing power and drive speed plays a very, very, very key factor in how quickly the profile loads. So now, Jan, let's go ahead and just move that slider all the way over to the right and then go ahead and connect to it so it full screens it for us. This takes a second. Perfect. You'll have to sign back in, unfortunately, now that we did that. But now that we can see that Deborah Berger, it's pulled down her account information onto the device. The profile's been created. It even pulled down her photo. And now that we're signed into the device, we can see down at the bottom, we have a number, or hang on. Jan, did it stop sharing? Oh, Jan, did we lose you? Oops. Paul and Veronica, you can still hear me okay, right?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I think because we were already low on RAM on her machine, we might be running a little bit low on resources now. But yeah, so we saw that Jan's machine enrolled and the desktop's pulled up. So now let's go ahead and Jan, if you don't mind stopping to share your screen, we're going to go through Veronica's next. Perfect. And then now, Veronica, if you could share your screen, and we're going to go through the same process. And then Veronica, I forget what the name of who you're emulating.
I have Patty today.
Patty? All right. So you are Patty today. So let's go ahead and sign in with Patty. Why a lot of my schools prefer if they can shorten their domain names.
Uh-huh.
There we go. Yeah, the device had just sat idle for a little while. So like I said, virtual machines, as you're going through this process, can be a little bit twitchy just because, like I said, it's sharing resources, it's a dual system. It's usually best to test it on individual devices that you have. Like maybe you've got one like on the side that you've used on your testing bench. Now I wanted to showcase the difference with Veronica's. So as you can see, I've got some implicit security policies because she's a principal and I have to lock things down and protect her account a lot more stringent than I do Jan's. So if you don't mind, Veronica, let's click on the little drop-down menu for the little device preparation stage. So as you can see right now, it's going through the processes and it's securing the hardware, it's going through registering the device, and right now it's installing the Intune management extension. And that's what's going to manage the device. Jan's did this as well, but since I didn't have a lot of those policies and stuff pushed down and locked down on her device, it was a lot quicker. That's the other thing I wanted to showcase as well. The more policies and applications that you tell AutoPilot to push at the AutoPilot stage, the slower this will be. So if your goal is to get the device to be set up and online and to the desktop within 10 to 20 minutes, you're really going to not want to force the applications to install during the AutoPilot stages. And that's where you're going to go back into that enrollment status page, click on that toggle, and then change it so that way you're only specifying certain apps are installed before a user can get to the desktop. And that's really important because as long as you're okay with the apps coming down 5 or 10 minutes after the user signs in, then the AutoPilot process can complete a lot quicker. Because I know during this enrollment setup, a lot of our users get very nervous. They're like, I don't know what it's doing. Why is it taking so long? This just seems to be taking forever. And some of them will panic and they'll shut the device or they'll hold the power button down and it'll mess up the enrollment. They'll turn the device back on. They got to reset it and they sometimes get stuck. And so I highly, highly recommend that as you go through these processes, make sure that you kind of use this mantra of, I'm going to push out as few devices forcibly during the AutoPilot process, and everything else is more or less going to come down after the fact as required, or my users will install it themselves in Company Portal. So it's really, really, really important to kind of understand that distinction because, like I said, if you end up putting 100 apps in here and you expect AutoPilot to install all of them before the device can go through its processes, it's going to truly install every single one of them. And until it gets a success on all of them, you won't be able to continue. So applications like Autodesk and stuff like that, those are not good applications to require in the AutoPilot stages. It will cause multiple issues. So now that it's gone through and installed the management agent, it's going down to the device setup. Now I have BitLocker encryption settings, and I have some other policy settings from network access protection, and because this demo tenant has A5. And what it's going through right now and doing is it's getting all these policies setting up. It's actually integrating it into the Defender EDR system. It's going through, it's identifying the apps that I've identified for principals as an IT admin. And it's making sure that the BitLocker drive encryption policy is enabled. So that way, when the user signs in, it will back up that recovery key to Azure AD, and the device will be fully encrypted. So by going through this process, we're completely doing that chip to cloud and zero trust that we've talked about in a lot of our previous presentations. Because before the user even gets to the desktop, we've already got a lot of these security policies and stuff pushed down to the device. The device has recognized that it's got to be applied before the user can start to use it. And we've met that security compliance in terms of making sure that that's all in place before the user starts using the device. Previously, we'd probably try and use like SCCM or group policy, and that's always been the de facto that we've used for years. Image the device, and then it's anybody can sign into it. Now that's theirs. Well, the problem with that though is that when you do it with SCCM, you more or less have to think about all of your security settings and such at the device level, especially if you're going to integrate it into a task sequence. Whereas with this type of system, we can do things much more granularly at a user control level. Like, I don't want some of these security policies applying to teachers, but I do my principals. And so this system gives me that ability to do that. So right now it sees the security policy is applied. So that BitLocker policy is applied successfully. And now it's working and looking at, oh, there's 2 apps that it recognizes need to be pushed down to the device. Now, I will preface that this one might fail on one of the apps due to the way that it works currently with the new store experience, but we will pivot if we need to, and I'll show you kind of how to get around that if it happens. But yeah, right now it's recognizing that there are 2 applications that need to be installed. So it's going through, pulling it down and putting it on the machine. Now, the other thing that I kind of want to call out here too, that's very important. So it's Intune has to move all of its information to our Microsoft CDN networks, which stands for Content Delivery Network. Kind of think of it as the modern equivalent to a distribution point, just cloud-based. Well, we have to think about the fact that, say, a remote user is at home, okay, and their internet at home is really truly bad. It's maybe 25 megabits per second, all right, and we have a large application that needs to be installed. Well, Intune will inevitably get it down to the device, but if your internet is slow and the device, and say it's 10 meg, 50 meg down, and the application is 8 gigs. Well, if you run the numbers, that's going to probably take an hour or so before that software is downloaded successfully. And so to compensate for that, what Intune does is Intune will activate the Intune Management Extension Agent. It will then access the Microsoft networking stack. It will talk to that CDN network. It will begin pulling down that file. It'll locally cache it on the device under the temp directory, run the installer, go through that installation process, and then it will delete those temporary files on the machine after it's been successfully completed after about 24 hours or so. And the reason why it keeps it on the device for a period of time is, say, for example, that you do choose to set up the what's it called, peer caching, or I wasn't planning on going into that part today, but there's a certain technology that you can do on Intune devices where it pulls from an on-prem distribution point that's not cloud attached. Darn it, my mind's blanking. But anyway, there's a way that you can set it to point to that device and pull from there first, and then go to the CDN network as a backup. And I'll go more into that and more of my future discussions when we get into more of the advanced granularity of it. But I just really wanted to showcase, like, it's really important to understand, try and keep AutoPilot as light and as efficient as possible. Security policies that are needed, proxy filters, major applications that they have to have before they can get to the desktop. Everything else, just let it naturally come down on the machines, because worst case, the Edge browser is going to be installed and ready to go. Even if the device has been re-imaged by whatever OEM or whoever it might be, Edge should always be installed. And we all know that our teachers at least appreciate being able to at least do that and at least work through the browser while the other stuff pulls down. And I know a lot of my teachers were patient about that. And I would always say, like, hey, I know you want the Office apps immediately, but I need you to wait about 20 or 30 minutes, and then you'll have access to them. And so it's just really, really important to make sure our users kind of understand that, it's light and efficiency and autopilot is super, super key. So yeah, so we're still waiting for the second app to install. And let's see here real quick. I'm gonna go and check and see if I can, because I forget what it was. Oh, it might try and install DRC Insight. We'll see. It's a testing application that a lot of our schools use. But yeah, so while it's going through and installing this, Veronica, if you could also expand the account setup piece too really quick, please, because this will probably go through a little quicker. So the other thing I want to explain, so, and actually, Veronica, scroll back up for me. All right, so device preparation is the AutoPilot process to get it into Intune so it's managed, okay? And Intune can do its processes. Now that it's in the device setup phase, the Intune management extension is doing its job on the device, pushing down the security policies, installing the apps, and then it's relaying and sending the information up to Intune. And then from there, and understand, these are all device-based policy settings at this point. You're targeting groups of devices. Now, once we get down to the account setup phase, that is where it's going to be looking at what you have targeted to the user groups in your environment. Now, the one thing I want to go over really quick that's very important. If you're using self-deploy mode and you have user policies applied, with self-deploy mode, there's no user assigned to the device. So AutoPilot won't know that that device is specified to be used by that user. And so it won't know what specific, like maybe granular policies that you want to push down to it because it's going to get confused. There's no dedicated user. And so what will happen is if you go down the self-deploy mode and you do everything with user-based policies, you'll notice that a lot of things won't apply. And so it's important to understand if you're going to do user-based policies, you need to stick to user enrollment with AutoPilot. If you go down self-deploy, I can't promise that the user targeted stuff is going to work. A lot of times what I run into is, like with lab situations, for example, applications will show up in the company portal, so like the students can see them, but like a security policy might conflict, and because there's no user associated to the machine, it doesn't apply properly. And so there's just certain situations where you really need to think about the nuances of this as you're bringing the system online. And I'm getting the feeling that second app is probably going to give me a little bit of a problem, but we'll see. I should have taken it out just in case. Oh, and it's important to note. So remember, in the enrollment status page, we configured it to allow the user to continue or to reset the device. It's important to notate that that will not show up until after that countdown timer that you set expires. So remember when we went and made that enrollment status page and we set it for 30 minutes? That is going to, until that 30 minutes has expired. Oh yeah, sorry, let me go adjust and turn on a light really quick. Sorry about that, team. Oh, it's getting darker over here in Chicago. All right, sorry. So yeah, so we're going to be waiting for this to finish. But yeah, that 30-minute countdown timer, once that expires, then you will see those options at the bottom. You will not see them beforehand. Now, what some of my schools do, they'll set that enrollment status page to like 10 minutes, and then they'll push out a separate policy that blocks this page in case the enrollment fails. I don't typically recommend that because, like I said earlier, from a security perspective, it's really not best practices, but it's really just something for us to kind of consider as we're going through this. Now we're going to go ahead and let Veronica's machine kind of finish going through these processes, and then I'm going to go and actually have Jan share her screen again, and I want to show us a couple of things. So Jan, you are you able to share your screen again, and or can you pull up that VM? Or are you still having the occasional computer issue?
No, I should be able to. 1 second.
Do you have Veronica? If you could stop sharing really quick, we'll have Jan share. All right, and then open up our Hyper-V at the bottom right. And then open up that one right there, up above. Yeah, go ahead and just click on it to open it. Did it move it to another screen?
This should be it because I have things pinned on my actual one.
Okay, it's just strange because it's still showing like your teams and stuff at the bottom. On the
Oh,
left-hand
wait.
side, hit the start menu then.
This one?
Yeah. Go ahead and click on it. I'm curious if it'll probably, yeah, it'll say, yeah. So, all right, go ahead and hit the little 2 squares at the top where it says Intune demo. Yeah. All right, and then try and double click on it again to full screen it. Man, it really wants to show our taskbar at the bottom. All right, hit the 2 squares at the top again. All right, and then where it says view, click that button, please. Click on, try full screen mode. Still showing menu. All right. Just go ahead and click on the desktop somewhere and then press your Windows key, please. There. So, sorry, I figured this would kind of work around what we were dealing with. So go ahead and click on settings for me, please. And then on the left-hand side, please click on accounts. And then please click on email and accounts. Oh, awesome. So Veronica's just went ahead and restarted, just took a few minutes longer. So the one thing I want to showcase with this, so we can see here, so now that Intune has done its enrollment process, it's gone through the different features and it's managed, this is how you can see that that's been successful if you need to as an IT admin on the device level. So if you on the right-hand side hit the little drop-down arrow under the user account, because remember it was user enrolled, you can see in here, you know, account settings and then click manage really quick. You might not be able to see this actually because you're not signed in as an admin. Oh, this is going to launch Edge. So go ahead and click and confirm and continue. You can see I already have data and privacy settings aside. Yeah, go ahead and continue without this data. All right, and then here's Deborah's account. Let's go ahead and X on the top right-hand corner and go ahead and close out of Edge. All right. So standard user can't see it, but you would be able to see in here underneath there'd be an option that shows info. You'll click the info button and then it would show you all the different stuff that has been pulled down to the machine so you can see what's been applied. Now, if we can go up to, go ahead, Jan, can you try and hit the start menu button again? I want to make sure it pulls up Deborah's, not yours. Yeah, try hitting the start menu button again on your keyboard, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, so click on the desktop again, and there you go. Try typing in where it says type here to search company portal, please. It might not be installed yet. Nope, there already is. All right, so go ahead and click on company portal, please. So remember, company portal is what replaces Software Center in terms of the curated store that you're going to make available to your users. And what I really wanted to showcase is that this has now been brought online and Jan is simulated as a teacher. So you can see that I have published these applications for Jan to have available to her. She can install this on the device. No admin rights required. It'll go in, it'll install it, and then report back to me that it was successful. And so it's really important to understand that this system can be granularized depending on job titles. And it's really helpful when you have a lot of different applications. You want to make sure that people aren't getting flooded with too much stuff, how you can break this down. Now, the other thing I want to show on the left-hand side is if you click devices, in the company portal application, you can see in here that the device is compliant and it can access company resources. This is a great way to see that like the device is doing what it's supposed to and that it's compliant and can access internal stuff. Now, if we go down to help and support on the left-hand side. So say, for example, the user is having issues. And so what's nice is you can click on the upload logs and contact support, and it will put it in the logs in the Intune portal so that the IT admin can download it. Now, they have the ability to do this on their own too, but if you kind of, as the user, want to expedite the assistance with what you might be having a problem with, this is a great way to do that and kind of help, reduce some work off of your IT workers. So, Jan, let's go ahead and stop sharing yours, and we're going to switch back to Veronica's, and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to have Veronica share her screen after she's signed in, and then I'm going to have her. So since we've learned the start menu thing, oh, we still got an account setup phase. So go ahead and hit the drop down really quick for account setup and scroll down. So we can see join your organization's network. So what's really important with that is, so say you have user-based Wi-Fi authentication and there's a policy that's got to be user-based pushed down. This is where it's going to start to apply that process. Now, what's really important is, and what I typically recommend, if your network is that restrictive, if you have the ability to allow them to connect to the guest network first, and then whitelist on the guest network all the Microsoft IPs for this technology, then what will happen is it'll start on the guest network, set itself up, and then it will switch over to the Wi-Fi profile and security settings that you have after it's finished the account setup phase. And so it's super nice that you can start out on the other Wi-Fi guest network, like if the device isn't seen or known at all, and then afterwards, it's enrolled, you can push out that profile and make sure that the Wi-Fi connects. Now, the one kind of nuanced little thing I'm kind of noticing right now with Wi-Fi profile is occasionally the user has to click connect one time before it works, especially if they're external. But I've kind of been seeing that like varying. If that is the case, let me know. We might have some alternative workarounds with like certificate-based machine like authentication rather than user that we could look into. But while this is going through its kind of final phases, let's actually go back and switch back to Jan's machine real quick, please, Veronica. And then Veronica, just let me know when this one finished its process. All right, awesome. And then Jan, if you don't mind, if you can go back up to the apps in your company portal. Click the apps button, please. All right, and then if you go ahead and click on VLC. Now, I know I've spoken about in my other videos that you want to make sure that the icon files that you import are square. So go back really quick to apps, Jan, if you don't mind, please. And the reason why I want to explain, click on the apps button again or toggle between the two. There we go. So here's why this is important. So you see this like interface and how this looks. Well, if you have a logo that's widescreen, then square, then portrait, the problem is that this portal is going to start to look really funky. And your users are going to probably be like, man, why does this look so weird? So it's always recommended use square logo files, ideally 500 pixels by 500 pixels. If not, we understand, we get it. But if you can, that's going to definitely resolve kind of the portal looks funky problem. So let's go ahead and click on the VLC video LAN one, please. And let's go ahead and click on the install button on the top right-hand corner. Like I said earlier, the user will see this install button, and it will download the software locally on the device. It will run it as system and install the software. And so the user doesn't have to have admin rights. it's very important that I kind of help make sure we understand this, because a lot of my customers lately have thought, oh, well, I need to give everybody admin rights. No, you don't. As long as you put the application in the Intune portal and you update it and push out new versions, well, the new versions will push out to your environment. And if you make it available, well, they can install it on their own accord, and you don't have to be there or present as the IT administrator to do it. And so it's just really kind of nice to be able to showcase, like, we don't have to keep doing this as IT administrators in the past, where we unbox the device, we let SCCM image it, or we do MDT, then we let the initial applications install, make sure drivers work, then do updates. And then from there, we sign in, we finish the initial setup, we use our admin rights to make any final policy tweaks and stuff like that. And then from there, we give it to the user after that. And so it's really kind of like cumbersome to have to go through that process when we can just give the users the ability to do this on their own. And so it's really important to kind of understand that this will give you that ability to let users control software on their devices. And out of my top 2K team, if any of our customers have issues with this, please schedule time with me, through your DSR with me, and I will walk you through simplifying and making sure that this is all set up appropriately. All right, Jan, so if you don't mind, go ahead and stop sharing your screen. We're going to go to Veronica's now that all the security stuff has been set up appropriately, and we're at our desktop. Seeing two of myself.
Just one moment. My computer is, kind of glitchy.
Hey, I always tell myself, the more advanced computers get, the more kind of nuanced little things will happen, and it'll kind of give them human qualities, because, what makes us human is those little kind of differences, isn't it? I'm still waiting for the day when my computer can, give me a hard time. I know it's probably not appropriate, but I would find it funny if my computer, like, when I signed in the morning, like, why didn't you go through those emails? You really should be getting this stuff caught up. Yeah, I probably would not do well with AI. Awesome. So as we can see in Veronica's simulation, I had also Google Chrome forced to be installed before they can get to the desktop, because as you're going through this transition, you might have some principles that I'm not switching right now. I'll do it later. And so you can push out Chrome, and the policies that I teach a lot of my EDU customers will pull in all the browser bookmarks automatically to Edge. So while they might use Chrome initially, when you're ready to uninstall Chrome and push them over to Edge, all their bookmarks will be transferred over. So it's kind of nice at the principal level to be able to do that as well for teachers and other staffers. Now, Veronica, if you don't mind, if you could open up Company Portal on this one as well, it should be installed. You'll hit the Start menu and do Company Portal. Nope, I guess not. It's going to still take a few minutes. Yep. So her desktop, or her machine just finished loading the desktop, so Company Portal does take a couple of minutes to pull down. You can technically get it from the store to do it quicker, but let's just let it go through its processes. The one thing that I want to pull up really quick is in the start, let's go ahead and pull up Task Manager, please. Yep. And open that app. And then click on More Details. And then you see where it says CPU at the top. Click that, please, so it filters it based on like the ones that are using the most resources. So the thing I want to showcase with this, you see this host process for OMA DM client. That is actually the service name for the Intune Management Extension Agent. So I really wanted to showcase and explain that I know in the documentation you're probably looking for something that says Intune Management Extension or Intune Agent or something like that. That is not what it's called at the system level. So as Intune is making changes to the devices, it is utilizing this service. So when you need to see like, hey, is it actually installing something? Is it still processing? Is it still setting stuff up? If you come into the Task Manager and you see that this process is high, then yes, that means it's doing something. And I'm almost willing to bet you right now what's slowing us down a little bit is the BitLocker configuration policy. Because remember, BitLocker has to encrypt the whole hard drive and then report back a success. And so it's probably taking a little bit of extra time, and the process is just going through and it's trying to check and make sure that that's all done. And so it's utilizing a few extra CPU resources to try and expedite where it can to try and to push it through. And so that's more than likely why we're seeing a little bit of slowdown at the moment. So understand too, like I said, virtual machine on a shared device. And not only that though, but like BitLocker encryption, typically, if it can, we'll try and use hardware encryption by default. If not, it will go back to the software layer. And since we're on the virtual machine, it has to default to software layer since it can't directly talk to her SSD or NVMe drive that's in the machine. So let's go ahead, Veronica, please, and let's open up let's go and look for Company Portal one more time. Oh, it's still going to take a minute. All righty. Well, let's go ahead and while that kind of finishes its process, let's go ahead and open up the Edge browser. There's one thing I really kind of want to highlight and showcase that I went ahead and did. So go ahead and sync. And what this is doing is I have some stuff pulled down so that as she signs into this, go ahead and click. I have some custom extensions that will pre-install for this principal to make her life a little bit easier. And as you can see, I pre-installed the Microsoft spell checker and into the Edge browser, so that way it's built in. And what's nice about this is yes, they have to sign in the one time to authorize it, but a lot of our customers in the EDU sector use Grammarly. Well, in case you're not aware, Grammarly, you have to have a BAA agreement, a business association agreement, or a security agreement to utilize that platform, especially beneath the for students, because you need either parental consent, and it's technically not supposed to be used for students under the age of 13, period. Well, with your EES agreement through Microsoft, you've already signed a business association agreement. And so since it's coming back into our systems and it's coming back into your educational tenant, you don't have to worry about that same compliance concern because it is compliant in our systems with how it's set up today. And if you switch over to our extension for that, then you don't have to question where the data is going. You know it's going back to your educational tenant in those environments, and you don't have to question that from a security perspective. Now, the other extension I also auto install, and I'll be teaching more about this in the future. Do you see to the left of the that right there? That is the Office application. I always like to push that one out. If you click it real quick, please, and then click on Sign In, and it's one time single sign-in activates. You just have to click it and select the account. Go ahead and X out of the multi-language piece. All right, and then go ahead and hit that box again. The reason why I like this is now there's an easy clickable button for the educator to go in and access all of these core components. You don't have to go to office.com. You don't have to go to a bunch of places. It just gives you a nice little quick snippet. And so this is really great to be able to just quickly, pop in and pop out to the different apps in the M365 ecosystem. Now go ahead and close out of this browser tab. And as you can see, this auto launched to the Microsoft Education site. So before the user couldn't go to another website of their own choosing, I locked it down. And what I would normally do is I would lock this down to my school's websites. And so the first page they see, our organization's page. And then from there, they can go to wherever else they want to. But this is very important on the education side because, especially with students, we want to make sure that those initial websites are locked down and that they're going to a very particular website at first. And so it's very important to understand that this was locked down and she went directly to this location. Now go ahead and hit the new tab button at the top, please. You can also see that the new tab went to this website as well. So I've also programmed that for the default one. Now, Veronica, go ahead and go to bing.com for me, please. You want to manually go there yourself. Okay. She has the full capabilities to go there. And with Bing, the other thing I wanted to showcase really quick that's very important, this brings up her curated and custom Bing content for your organization. And what's super awesome about this is, say people are working on things, collaborating, and there's new updates, like it'll show in here. But if you click on that school button at the top, that will show you internally what documents are in your institution that are maybe publicly available, or maybe someone shared something with you. And this is a great way to be able to see that just from bing.com, sign in with your school account. And so it's really great to be able to see this and just kind of pick up and resume where you left off. And so I just want to showcase this part really quick in case some of your users are used to google.com. Bing.com has a couple of great features that really makes this good for educators. And the other thing too is there's news. All right. And if you go back for me really quick and hit the back button, Bing.com typically has news. And so if you scroll down here really quick, you'll see that the initial launch page that you would see on the Edge browser that would show all the local news and stuff, that's been disabled. And all the intrusive ads have been blocked. That's a custom feature to Edge and Edge and Education, where we're doing our due diligence to try and reduce the amount of stuff that is appearing to staff and students that is disruptive, or maybe stuff that they really shouldn't be seeing. And so I just wanted to make sure that we understood that. And the other big thing too, from a privacy perspective, from a school, if you're using bing.com for your searches and not Google, once again, you're abiding by our business association agreement with your school account. So whatever your students and staff search for, look for, whatever they do is protected under our privacy. And so the Microsoft privacy and the agreement that you have. And so it's really important to understand, like the staff and students, they're not a number to us that we're going to process and crunch and sell to advertisers. And oftentimes on Google, that truly is the case. You'll notice that they'll go to google.com and the first 3 or 4 things are just advertisements. And Google gets paid for that. And they get paid for every student that clicks on that. They get paid for every staff member that does. And so understand, Microsoft is privacy and security focused, whereas Google and our competitors in a lot of cases are not. They want that data to sell. And I know that they say on the front end that they don't do that for education on the Google side, but I've had multiple instances over the years where I've seen stuff like this get out. And it was because it was something in the Google tenant that allowed that privacy to be exposed. It could have been an extension or an app or something else that made the change, but one way or another, it occurred. So Veronica, really quick, and we're about to wrap up. Let's go ahead and close out of the Edge browser for me, please. And let's go ahead and let's see if we can find Company Portal one more time. We might have to restart the virtual machine. Yeah, so let's go ahead and restart it. You can actually just actually just go through the right there and just do a normal restart like a user would. Yeah, the one thing with the company portal application, we're working on this on the internal dev side, but it requires the user to be signed in before it'll start the installation process. So as much as I would like it to install during AutoPilot, it just unfortunately doesn't at this moment. But we are working on internally changing that mechanism so it does it if it's at the device level. And I know some of you are getting past that by setting up the store for education and using the offline version of Company Portal. We just don't have that available in the new store experience yet. And so I'm trying not to teach all of our customers to use that because it's going to be, that'll stop working at the end of April, which is the end of next month. And I don't want to teach something that won't work. So more than likely Company Portal will probably take a couple more minutes to install, but let's go ahead and open up our task manager again real quick. And yep, and open that for me. And we'll go ahead and now we can see, all right, Teams is doing its auto install. It's updating all the Microsoft apps. You can see Defender Advanced Threat Protection is launched already. Like I was talking about earlier, that was the initial security policy. I wanted to make sure that was pushed down onto the device before the user could get to the desktop, because that way, in case they did get to the desktop and they did double click on something and it was malicious, at least the Defender Advanced EDR agent is already running and it can start immediately doing its job. So, and that's also probably what's slowing this down a little bit too. So go ahead and search for company portal one more time. It's still probably got to catch up. Yeah, so that's fine. So what I'm going to showcase really quick, if you don't mind stopping sharing your screen, Veronica. So we're going to let that finish, and we'll probably bring that up during our next video. But the last part I want to kind of showcase and go over is what we see in the Intune console after this has all been, or after we've gone through some of these processes. So after this has been done, we can go to all devices and we can see that the devices are in the system. And right now, that'll be something that we'll have to work in the future on. But right now, I'm pretty sure it was the desktop 629K. Yep, that was Deborah's machine. And we can see it enrolled it. It's a virtual machine. The device is compliant based on our compliance policies. But now I can come in here and see the enrollment, how it was enrolled, it was successful, and that it worked through its processes. And then say, for example, I want to see, all right, well, what are the apps that are on the machine after it did this? Okay, well, company portal is installed, VLC is installed, and it's available for Kahoot and DC. And then say it's a shared device, you can see it from that device perspective too in here. User experience, this is also awesome. Over time as the system comes online, you'll start to see how long it takes them to sign into the device, launch applications. You'll be able to customize this and curate it over time. The recovery key probably isn't going to be in here yet. Yep, not yet, because it's activated and it's going to upload it in the next couple hours. But yeah, the device configuration, this is great to come in and see. The policies and whether they were successful, the compliance, and the other piece too, like here's your hardware, so you can see everything about the device. And so it's just super, super important to understand, like there's all of this information available to you as it's going through that process. Now, the other thing that I also want to preface before we go, say, for example, you made a boo-boo and you went through and you enrolled it with the wrong account and it was tied to somebody else. You can now come in here and change the primary user and tether it to the new user. And when they sign in, it will be recognized as their device. Now, say, for example, the naming mechanism, had a malfunction or it didn't work. You can come up here and go to rename device. And then this one, I think it was PP, what was it? Pineview Public School Laptops, I think is what I set it to. The annoying part with this one, though, is if you rename after the fact, you have to do this, which is bracket, bracket, serial number, bracket, bracket. Well, I should say wavy bracket, bracket. I know in the main AutoPilot console, as well as with PowerShell, that's not what it is. But unfortunately, in this specific console, when you're renaming a device, make sure that you take that into consideration. And here, we rename the device, we sync it, and here within a couple of minutes, Jan's device will recognize that I made that change, and it will tell her that she needs to reboot within 2 minutes, and it will restart that device and go through that process. So from here, so now we've got that device managed and we can make the appropriate changes. It'll update the remaining information over the next 24 hours. So after enrollment, please don't expect all of the information to be preloaded. It does take about 24 hours before the system populates everything. And then from there, yeah, you've got full management of the device. You can make changes, do what you want with it. You can rotate the BitLocker key. And you can also even locate the device in case it gets lost or stolen. So that was today's presentation. I wanted to help the team get these devices enrolled. And then during our next presentation, we'll go into some more of the nitty-gritty of application deployments, repackaging, and security policies, and everything else that EDU needs to kind of make sure it's successful in our environment. So happy to help, and thank you so much, team. Really appreciate it. All right, well, have a great day, and I will talk to everybody here soon. Thank you so much, team.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler.
Have a good night, y'all.
Have a good night.